In 1980, a psychologist put a rat alone in a cage with two water bottles. One was plain water, the other was laced with heroin. Every time, without exception, the rat chose the drug. It drank until it couldn't stop. It drank until it died. That experiment ran for years. It shaped drug policy. It shaped sentencing guidelines. It shaped how the entire modern world decided to think about addiction. And then, someone ran it again, but changed one thing. They gave the rat somewhere to live. The original experiments are real. Rats placed alone in small metal boxes with drug-laced water do, reliably, drink themselves to death. The data was clean. The conclusion seemed obvious. Addiction is chemical. The drug hijacks the brain. Willpower doesn't stand a chance. Bruce Alexander was a psychologist at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. He'd been watching these experiments for years. And something kept bothering him. Not the results. The setup. Every single one of those rats had been alone, sealed in a small box with nothing to do, no one to interact with, no choices to make except which bottle to drink from. Alexander didn't think the experiment was testing addiction. He thought it was testing what happens when you remove everything that makes life worth engaging with, and then offer a chemical that makes the emptiness feel temporarily full. He wanted to know what the rat would choose if it had a reason to stay present. So he built Rat Park. Rat Park was not a cage. It was a 200-square-foot colony packed with cedar shavings, tunnels, tin cans, wheels, and other rats, males and females together, space to run, social dynamics to navigate, a world that worked like a world. Both bottles were still there. The choice was still available. The rats tried the drug water. They weren't indifferent to it, but they didn't drink compulsively. They didn't drink themselves to death. Even when the drug water was sweetened with sugar, even when the plain water was made slightly bitter, the Rat Park rats kept choosing plain water most of the time. Then Alexander ran the version that should have changed everything. He took rats that had already been isolated for 57 days. Rats that had been alone in small cages, with drug water long enough to be, by any measure, dependent. He moved them into Rat Park. Most of them chose to stop. They went through withdrawal. It wasn't easy. But given space, given other rats, given a world worth being in, most of the addicted rats voluntarily reduced their drug use and eventually stopped. The drug hadn't changed. The chemical was identical. What changed was the world the rat was living in. Alexander published in 1981. The findings were largely ignored, not because the methodology was weak, because the conclusion was inconvenient. The entire framework of addiction treatment, the entire moral logic of how society dealt with addicts, required the isolated rat to be correct. If addiction was about the drug, the answer was to criminalize the drug and punish the user. Simple. Actionable. It pointed blame at the substance and the individual. If addiction was about environment, the problem was something much harder. It meant asking what kind of world people were actually living in. What kind of cage? The isolated rat model won, not because the science was better, because it was easier. Here is what the human data shows. During the Vietnam War, roughly 20% of American soldiers were using heroin regularly. The U.S. government was bracing for a wave of addiction to hit American cities when they came home. It didn't happen. Around 95% of those soldiers simply stopped when they returned. No years of treatment. No long recovery programs. They came back to their families, their communities, their familiar lives. And most of them walked away from the drug with almost no struggle at all. Same chemical, same dependency, different environment, completely different outcome. The same pattern showed up in hospitals. Patients given high doses of opioids during surgery or serious injury, doses that would produce dependency if taken recreationally. The overwhelming majority went home, stopped taking the medication, and never sought it out again. The drug doesn't behave the same way in every context. The context is doing most of the work. There's one detail from Alexander's study that almost never gets mentioned. The isolated rats consumed up to 16 times more drug water than the Rat Park rats. Same rat, same brain, same chemical. 16 times the consumption. based entirely on the conditions of the environment. 16 times. That number should have ended the debate. What this means is uncomfortable. It means that for decades, a significant part of drug policy has been built on a finding that was never properly tested. The rat in the isolated cage was never a model of addiction. It was a model of despair. And we took the behavior of a creature stripped of everything meaningful and used it to design systems that stripped addicted people of the few things they had left: criminal records, housing, family, employment. We took people who were already in a small cage and made the cage smaller. The countries that shifted toward treating addiction as a public health issue rather than a criminal one have seen dramatic reductions in overdose deaths and long-term dependency. Not by making drugs more available, by redirecting resources toward the conditions: housing, community, a reason to come back, giving people a rat park to return to. Bruce Alexander is now in his 80s. The opioid crisis has killed hundreds of thousands of people in North America alone. The isolated rat is still the model most policy is built on. When researchers examined the brains of rats that had drunk themselves to death, they found exactly what everyone expected: the neurological fingerprints of addiction, the dopamine pathway changes, the physical evidence of dependency. The brain looked addicted because it was addicted, but it had gotten there because the environment had emptied everything else out first. The chemical filled a space the cage had already hollowed. The rat's brain wasn't broken. It was responding rationally to an impossible situation, finding the only relief available and returning to it because nothing else in that box gave it a reason not to. The most unsettling thing Alexander found isn't that rats choose drugs when they're isolated. It's that they stop choosing them when they're not. That the pull of the chemical, as real as it is, as physical as it is not stronger than the pull of a life worth living. The rat didn't need willpower. It needed somewhere to be.